You're a freeloader, my son shouted at the Christmas dinner table in my own home where he lived at my expense. His wife nodded coldly, supporting his betrayal. The guest froze in shock when I calmly replied, "You have until morning to leave." The next day, the police knocked on the door. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The front door clicked, shut behind me, and Dylan's voice cut through the warm glow of Christmas lights before I'd even removed my coat. "Finally showed up. Thought you got lost in your book sorting again." He lounged across my leather recliner as if it belonged to him. The phone screen mirrored the tree's lights while his thumb swiped endlessly. He didn't bother looking up. 8 months of this routine. 8 months of returning to discover him occupying my territory, my seat, my tranquility. I placed my coat neatly in the hall closet. Drops from thawing snow dripped onto the wooden floor. The library volunteer work had extended later than usual. Mrs. Henderson required assistance with the festive returns, but I'd rushed through the wintry chill to make it back for Christmas Eve. "Good evening." I entered the living room, smoothing my sweater. "How are the plans for tomorrow progressing?" Stella appeared from the kitchen entrance, holding a dish towel, her back intentionally facing me. Her blonde hair was tied in a severe ponytail that gave her a youthful appearance, closer to the university girl Dylan had wed than the 32-year-old residing in my home since April. "We'll manage tomorrow on our own." Dylan's voice held that usual note of rejection. "No need for your assistance." The fireplace popped gently, throwing flickering shadows around the space. I'd set up the holiday decorations alone 3 weeks earlier. Garland draped the mantel. The porcelain nativity set my deceased wife Margaret had gathered item by item. Stockings suspended thoughtfully, all in perfect order, except for the family under them. "It's all taken care of," Stella chimed in without facing me, her tone as level as frozen asphalt. I approached the fireplace, fixing a slightly tilted bauble on the tree. The silver bell tinkled gently under my fingers. Control. What a curious term. I pondered whose authority she referred to. "The Smiths are looking forward to tomorrow," Dylan went on, at last lifting his eyes from his device. "Mary's preparing her renowned potato salad." The statement struck like frigid water. Smiths tomorrow. I hadn't been informed about visitors. Dylan's brows arched in feigned astonishment. "Oh, didn't we tell you?" "Yes, John and Mary are joining, and Anne from across the way. Tom from my previous workplace as well." He gestured casually. "Just a handful of folks." My grip firmed on the decoration. Just a handful in my residence at my dining area. Utilizing my plates, sipping my wine, consuming meals bought with my retirement funds. When was this arranged? "Sometime last week." Dylan shrugged, eyes dropping back to his screen. Stella distributed the invitations. "You were likely at the library." Naturally, I was at the library. I helped there every Tuesday and Thursday. Had for 3 years post-retirement. They were aware of my routine. They'd scheduled to avoid me. The Christmas tree's illuminations softened a bit as I gazed at them. Scarlet, emerald, amber, hues that ought to signify coziness and festivity. Instead, they seemed like adornments in another's dwelling, another's existence. "Exactly how many people?" "6, perhaps 7, Stella responded at last, still with her back to me. Nothing elaborate. Nothing elaborate except the upscale provisions I'd spotted filling my fridge over the past week. The costly wine bottles on the countertop, the high-end turkey that was double my normal expenditure. Dylan extended himself in my chair, his feet resting on the coffee table I'd restored personally last spring. The same table now marked with moisture rings from cups he never bothered with coasters for. "Don't fret, old-timer. We're on top of it." Old-timer. The words lodged in my chest like an icy weight. 65 wasn't ancient. Retired didn't mean worthless. This remained my house, my sanctuary, my world, didn't it? I adjusted another bauble. This one a tiny wooden angel Margaret had decorated by hand. The fine brushwork evoked her precise touch, her tender manner of beautifying everything. She would have been hospitable toward surprise visitors. She would have beamed and greeted them and somehow created enchantment. But Margaret was gone, had been absent for 4 years. And I wasn't Margaret. Well, I murmured softly. I guess I should step aside then. Smart thinking. Dylan's focus had already shifted back to his phone. "We have final touches to complete." I lingered there briefly, observing my son swipe through whatever captivated him more than simple politeness. watching my daughter-in-law navigate my kitchen with assurance as if she owned the place, hearing the fire snap in the hearth where I'd passed numerous serene nights reading, reflecting, reminiscing. The staircase groaned beneath my steps as I ascended, each one distancing me from the activity in my living room and nearer to the haven of my bedroom. From below I caught Stella's voice, though not the specifics, something regarding linens and seating plans. My fingers gripped the railing Margaret had buffed every Saturday for 23 years. The bedroom door shut with a gentle snap, dampening the sounds from downstairs. I paused there momentarily, palm still on the knob, attuned to the subdued noises of setup proceeding without me. Stella's steps traversed the kitchen. Dylan's tone spiked briefly, then diminished. I slipped off my shoes, aligning them neatly by the bed, and eased into the reading chair near the window. Snow persisted outside, each particle briefly illuminated by the street lamp before vanishing into the night. The Johnson's place opposite shimmered with holiday lights, vibrant strings framing every pane, every entrance, and blow-up Santa gesturing automatically from their lawn. My desk drawer glided open with the customary rasp of timber on timber. Within, under pension documents and service statements, rested the photo collections I seldom opened these days. Margaret curating them had been one of her subtle delights. All ordered by date, tagged, safeguarded. The initial volume opened to our marriage day. Margaret in ivory lace, glowing despite the modest courthouse venue we'd selected for financial constraints. My youthful self posed next to her in a loaned suit, both of us smiling as if we'd struck gold. In essence, we had. I flipped the page. Dylan at half a year, plump cheeks and sparkling eyes grasping toward the lens with small hands. Margaret had documented every landmark. Initial strides, first utterances, debut school day. Dylan constructing blanket strongholds in this exact chamber at age 8. Dylan at commencement had a bit crooked. Certificate raised proudly, joy radiating from him. The following image halted me abruptly. Dylan at 25, the year he'd secured the assistant manager role at the furniture outlet. He'd phoned that evening, voice buzzing with thrill. Dad, I made it. I'm finally advancing. Where had that ambitious youth disappeared? The one who'd pulled extra hours, who'd scrimped for months to afford Stella's ring, who'd discussed forging a future rather than leeching off one. 8 months prior, he'd arrived at my threshold with 2 bags and a tale of brief hardships. Just a few weeks, Dad, till we stabilize. The furniture place had dismissed him in March, cost reductions they'd claimed. Stella's shifts at the salon had dropped to half-time. They'd exhausted their cards maintaining facades. That truck loan for Dylan, the flats lease, meals out thrice weekly since Stella said she was too weary to prepare food. I'd agreed naturally. They were kin. You aid kin. But age should be a temporary span, not an enduring abode. Downstairs, a heavy item thudded. Stella's voice rose, edged with annoyance. Dylan's reply was indistinct but condescending. The same inflection he'd directed at me before. The same one he'd employed for months. I pulled out the little journal I stored in the drawer. Margaret had joked about my inventories, my computations, my compulsion to monitor all. You systematize the food shopping, Jasper, she'd chuckled. But figures don't deceive. Utility charges risen 37% since April. Food expenses doubled. Water consumption tripled due to Stella's lengthy baths and Dylan's habit of operating the dishwasher every day. Full or not. Last week, I'd spotted the credit statement Dylan abandoned on the counter. $250 at the tech shop, $300 at the shopping center. While I snipped vouchers and chose store brands to stretch funds, he was acquiring Bluetooth earbuds and branded pants. The journal sheets brimmed with figures. 8 months of escalated costs. 8 months of seeing my nest egg shrink while sustaining 2 grown-ups who'd apparently forgotten accountability. Margaret's picture beamed at me from the collection. She'd always highlighted Dylan's positives, justified his decisions when I fretted over his extravagance or his inclination for easy routes. He's discovering his path, she'd remarked. People navigate differently, but this wasn't discovery. This was opting for the simple route, the one laid with another's concessions. A door banged below. Dylan's voice escalated, not fully audible but plainly conveying exasperation. Stella's retort was keener. I shut the photo book and stowed it back in the drawer. The journal followed, beside the accumulating proof that my benevolence had turned into indulgence, that my son had confused compassion with frailty. The bedroom seemed more confined somehow, squeezed by the burden of insight. My haven had become an escape. My own residence, a spot where I concealed from those who ought to appreciate my support. Outside, the snow kept descending. The Johnsons' robotic Santa gestured merrily to empty air. Throughout the area, households were wrapping up their Christmas Eve setups, assembling by trees, exchanging eagerness for dawn. I was passing mine, tallying the price of my generosity. The home quieted as night advanced, but the silence felt altered now, not serene but tense like the lull preceding a tempest. I donned sleepwear, cleaned my teeth, performed the minor habits that had steadied my days since Margaret's passing. Structure had been my lifeline then, the fragile cord that bound existence when sorrow risked dismantling all. Now structure seemed like capitulation, a silent embrace of being sidelined in my own existence. The bed received me with accustomed ease, but rest seemed remote. Below, feet paced the floor, a cupboard shut. The fridge buzzed as it opened and closed. Dylan and Stella remained active, still organizing their gathering, their festivity in my home, using my means on my dime. Tomorrow would deliver visitors I hadn't welcomed, dialogues I hadn't selected, a display of familial bliss while my true family regarded me as a mere proprietor and not a valued one. The snow pattered softly on the pane, and I heeded it like a timer. Christmas dawn came with the noise of rattling cookware and flowing taps. I roused organically, no buzzer required. My body clock had maintained engineer's timing for 4 decades. Through the chamber window, snow blanketed the garden in spotless white, untouched save for bunny prints by the barrier. The corridor felt toasty as I went down the steps, warmed by the bustle in the kitchen beneath. Stella's voice floated up, chatting to someone via phone about schedules and accompaniments. Her manner was lively, more vibrant than I'd noted in months. Told them 7 precisely. "Yes, Mary, I realize your potato salad requires cooling. Just deliver it when you can." I arrived at the kitchen threshold and paused. The vista ahead resembled setup for a eatery launch, not a relaxed holiday meal. Stella positioned at the range, phone wedged between shoulder and ear, at once glazing what seemed a 20-pound bird and mixing something in a big vessel. The surfaces strained under a variety of unfamiliar platters. Glass bowls for serving, metallic trays, fabric serviettes still wrapped. "Good morning," I stated. She peeked over her shoulder, scarcely halting her coordinated routine between cooker and burners. "Morning. Coffee's ready." The dining space table, seen through the opening, had been revamped. My plain oak surface now sported a beige cloth I'd never encountered. Arrangements for 8 shone beneath the light fixture. The fine porcelain I'd kept in the loft since Margaret's service, evidently fetched and set without my awareness. 8 individuals, not the 6 or 7 Dylan had noted. 8. "Stella, how many did you invite?" Dylan managed the invites. Ask him. She didn't pivot this time, intent on placing what appeared to be 3 varieties of loaves in a woven holder. I recounted the setups once more. 8 dishes, 8 utensil groups, 8 goblets. The focal display, a lavish setup of evergreen branches, crimson fruits, and golden trim, priced more than my usual weekly food budget. It would have been courteous to know the precise count. "It's Christmas. Pals are attending." Her inflection implied the discussion was finished. The refrigerator revealed more surprises. 2 bottles of expensive wine, a cheese platter covered in plastic wrap, shrimp arranged on a serving tray. The vegetables were premium quality. Asparagus bundles tied with twine, baby potatoes, ingredients for what appeared to be homemade cranberry sauce. Dylan emerged from the living room, hair tousled, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. He headed straight for the coffee pot without acknowledging me. "Your mother and I used to cook Christmas dinner together," I said to his back. "Simple meal, just family." "Well, this isn't just family anymore." He poured coffee into my favorite mug, the blue ceramic one Margaret had given me for my 60th birthday. "We thought you'd want to celebrate properly." Properly? As if my quiet Christmases with Margaret had been somehow inadequate. "Who exactly is coming?" Dylan rattled off names like items on a shopping list. John and Mary Smith, obviously. Anne from next door. Tom Brown from the store. His girlfriend Lisa. Maybe Rick from down the street if he doesn't have to work. He paused, thinking. Oh, and Stella's sister might drive down from Cleveland. 8 potential guests had become 9 in my house, eating food purchased with my pension money. This seems like quite an undertaking for a casual Christmas dinner. Stella finally turned around, wooden spoon in hand, face flushed from kitchen heat. "We wanted to do something special, show people how grateful we are for." She gestured vaguely around the kitchen. "For everything. Grateful." The word felt hollow, Coming from someone who'd been treating my home like her personal domain for 8 months, the turkey alone must have cost $60. "We wanted quality," Dylan said, defensive. "Now, you always taught me not to cut corners." True. I had taught him that in the context of work, of building things to last, of taking pride in craftsmanship, not in the context of spending someone else's money on impressive displays. The kitchen timer chimed. Stella spun back to the oven, pulling out a tray of what appeared to be homemade rolls. The smell was admittedly magnificent. Yeast and butter and warmth that belonged in a family magazine photo. "What time are people arriving?" "Around 2, Dylan answered. "Gives us time to finish prep and get cleaned up." 5 hours. 5 hours until my quiet home would fill with virtual strangers. Until my living room became a stage for Dylan and Stella's performance of successful hosting. I refilled my coffee mug, a different one since Dylan had claimed mine, and retreated to the living room. The Christmas tree looked smaller somehow, dwarfed by folding chairs that had been retrieved from the basement and arranged in a semicircle. My reading chair had been pushed against the wall to make room for the expanded seating arrangement. Through the kitchen doorway, I watched Stella move with purposeful efficiency, Dylan occasionally stirring something or opening wine to let it breathe. They worked together like a team, comfortable in their shared project. When had they planned this? How many conversations had happened around my absence? How many decisions made without consulting the person who would pay for them? The house phone rang. Dylan answered with exaggerated cheer. "Merry Christmas." "Yes, everything's on schedule. Can't wait to see you." I sat in my displaced chair, surrounded by evidence of a celebration I hadn't chosen, drinking coffee from a mug that wasn't my favorite, watching my son and daughter-in-law transform my home into their vision of holiday entertainment. The day stretched ahead of me like a performance I'd never auditioned for, but was somehow expected to star in, smile, be gracious, play the role of generous patriarch, while my savings account funded their social ambitions. Outside, the snow continued falling, blanketing the world in silence. The afternoon had felt endless. I'd retreated to my study after the kitchen discovery, trying to read, trying to focus on anything other than the elaborate performance being orchestrated in my own home. But the sounds of preparation filtered through every wall, running water, clattering dishes, Stella's voice directing some invisible production. The doorbell rang at exactly 6:00. I rose from my chair, straightening my sweater, and walked to the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 figures bundled in winter coats. My hand hesitated on the doorknob for just a moment before turning it. Jasper. Mary Smith beamed at me, her arms laden with a covered dish and a bottle of wine wrapped in festive paper. Behind her, John stamped snow from his boots on the porch mat. "What a wonderful home. Thank you for inviting us." The words hit like a physical blow. "Thank you for inviting us to my own house. This is, of course, please come in." I stepped aside, forcing my face into what I hoped resembled warmth. Mary bustled past me into the foyer, John following with the quiet evening Jasper. They began removing their coats, and I took them automatically, hanging them in the hall closet I'd organized 30 years ago. As I arranged their winter wear beside my own jacket, I wondered when I'd become a guest in my own home. "Oh, it smells absolutely divine," Mary's voice carried from the living room. "Stella must be an amazing cook." I followed them in, watching Mary's eye stake in the Christmas decorations, the family photos on the mantel, the carefully arranged furniture. Everything bore the marks of long habitation. My books on the shelves, my reading glasses on the side table, the throw pillows Margaret had embroidered positioned exactly where I'd left them. "Actually, Stella does the cooking," I said carefully. The doorbell chimed again. Ann Wilson stood on the porch, a plate of homemade cookies balanced in her hands, her face bright with seasonal cheer. "Merry Christmas, dear." She stepped inside without waiting for invitation, the familiarity of a longtime neighbor. "I brought my sugar cookies. Dylan said they were your favorites." Dylan said, "When had my preferences been discussed with neighbors in conversations I wasn't part of?" "That's very thoughtful," I managed, taking the cookies and leading her to the living room. The space filled quickly with winter coats and cheerful voices. Tom Brown arrived last, carrying a case of beer and looking around appreciatively. "Dylan, you've got a beautiful place here," he called toward the kitchen, though Dylan was nowhere to be seen. "Thanks for having me." I moved through the room, offering drinks from my own bar cart, knowing instinctively where glasses were kept, which bottle of wine to uncork. Each action marked me as the home's owner. Yet the guests' comments painted Dylan as host. "You've decorated so beautifully for Christmas," Mary settled into the sofa, wine glass in hand. These ornaments look like family heirlooms. I've always loved the holidays in this house, I replied, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. John looked up from examining the family photos on the mantel. How long have you and Dylan lived here together? The question hung in the air like smoke. I felt every eye in the room turned toward me, waiting for an answer that would either maintain Dylan's fiction or expose it. Well, it's complicated, I said finally. Before anyone could ask for clarification, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Dylan appeared in the living room doorway, freshly showered and dressed in the expensive shirt I'd watched him buy last month with money he didn't have. Sorry I'm late getting down here. His voice boomed with artificial cheer. Hope Dad's been taking good care of you. Dad, not Jasper. Dad, positioning me as the subordinate, the helper, the secondary figure in this gathering. Jasper's been wonderful, Anne said warmly. Such a gracious host. Dylan's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes. Well, he certainly knows his way around the house. The comment drew chuckles from guests who didn't understand its barb. Of course I knew my way around the house. It was my house. Tom raised his beer in Dylan's direction. Great place you've got here, man. Must be nice having so much space. It has its advantages, Dylan replied, moving to claim the center of the room, though it gets expensive maintaining a place like this. Expensive maintained with whose money exactly? Mary noticed my silence. Jasper, you're awfully quiet. Are you feeling all right? Before I could answer, Stella's voice cut through the conversation from the kitchen doorway. Dinner's ready. Everyone come to the table. The announcement created a natural surge of movement. Guests rose, gathering their wine glasses, following Stella's gestures toward the dining room. I remained seated for a moment, watching Dylan shepherd people toward the elaborately set table, playing host in my home with my dishes. The dining room buzzed with appreciative comments about the formal setting, the centerpiece, the careful arrangement of 8 place settings around my oak table. I followed slowly, last in the procession, feeling like a stranger arriving at someone else's party. The dining room glowed with candlelight and Christmas warmth. My oak table, which had hosted countless family meals over 23 years with Margaret, wore an elaborate cream tablecloth I'd never seen before. The good china, stored in the attic since Margaret's funeral, gleamed under the chandeliers she'd picked out when we'd first bought the house. Guests gathered around the table, wine glasses in hand, voices bright with holiday cheer. Mary admired the centerpiece while Tom complimented the formal setting. Everyone moved with that pleasant anticipation of a special meal, completely unaware they were witnessing the systematic erasure of my authority in my own home. I approached my usual chair at the head of the table, the seat I'd occupied for nearly 3 decades, where I'd carved Christmas turkeys and birthday cakes, where I'd helped Dylan with homework and discussed my day with Margaret. My hand reached automatically for the familiar position. Dylan stepped directly into my path. Stop. The single word cut through the dinner party chatter like ice water. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouse. Every head turned toward us. You're not invited to this dinner table, freeloader. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear snow tapping against the windows. Tom's beer bottle stopped halfway to his lips. Mary's hand froze on her wine glass. Anne's mouth opened in a small shocked circle. What did you just say? My voice came out quieter than I had intended, barely above a whisper. You heard me. Dylan's posture radiated confidence, feeding off the audience of shocked faces. We invited real guests tonight, oh my. Mary's whispered words barely broke the silence. I stood frozen, hands still extended toward my chair, while my 35-year-old son blocked my path like a bouncer at an exclusive club. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing closer as every eye focused on this moment of public humiliation. Maybe we should. Anne started, her voice trailing off uncertainly. No, stay. Dylan's interruption was sharp, commanding. He needed to hear this. Stella appeared in the kitchen doorway, dish towel in her hands, watching the scene unfold. When our eyes met, she gave an almost imperceptible nod. Silent support for her husband's public degradation of his father. The Christmas tree lights from the living room cast colored shadows through the archway, red and green and gold dancing across faces frozen in disbelief. The formal table setting, my china, my silverware, my dining room, had become a stage for family warfare. John cleared his throat uncomfortably. Son, he's your father. A father who doesn't deserve respect. Dylan's voice rose, gaining strength from the shocked attention. All day long he sits around, does nothing, acts like he owns the place, acts like I own the place because I do own the place. Tom shifted in his chair, looking toward the front door like he was calculating escape routes. Maybe we should leave. Don't leave because of him. Dylan waved dismissively in my direction, treating me like an unwelcome intruder who'd crashed his party. This is our dinner party. Our dinner party in my house with my dishes purchased with my pension money. Mary reached toward Dylan's arm, her maternal instincts kicking in. Dylan, please, maybe we shouldn't. It's Christmas. No. His response was sharp enough to make her flinch. He needs to know his place. All day long he sits around, does nothing. Does nothing, while I volunteer at the library, maintain the house, pay the bills, and subsidize their lifestyle with my retirement savings. The candles flickered in their crystal holders. Margaret's candles from Margaret's holders on Margaret's table. She would have been horrified by this public spectacle, this violation of everything she'd taught Dylan about respect and family. Dylan, Anne's voice carried the weight of motherly disappointment. This is making everyone uncomfortable. He's made me uncomfortable for months. Dylan's gestures became more animated, feeding off the tension in the room. Living here like he owns the place. Living here like I own the place. The irony was so complete it almost made me laugh. Almost. The silence stretched between us, thick with shock and embarrassment. Around the table, my guests, no, Dylan's guests, sat frozen, trapped witnesses to a family meltdown they'd never expected when they'd accepted invitations to Christmas dinner. Stella moved slightly in the doorway, still watching, still silent, still supporting her husband's performance through passive presence. I remained standing beside my displaced chair. Every eye in the room focused on me, waiting for my response. The moment hung in the air like suspended breath, pregnant with possibility. The only sound was snow continuing to tap against windows and the soft hiss of candles burning down. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. I could feel 8 pairs of eyes watching me, waiting for my reaction to my son's public humiliation. Dylan stood beside my chair like a guard, chest puffed with artificial authority, feeding off the shocked attention of his audience. Mary reached across the table toward Dylan, her voice gentle but firm. Dylan, please, maybe we shouldn't, it's Christmas. He jerked his arm away from her touch. No, he needs to know his place. All day long he sits around, does nothing. John pushed back slightly from the table, his diplomatic instincts engaging. Son, he's your father. A father who doesn't deserve respect. Dylan's voice carried across the dining room, bouncing off walls that had heard 40 years of family conversations. But never anything like this. Living here like he owns the place. Anne shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her motherly features creased with concern. This is making everyone uncomfortable. He's made him uncomfortable for months. Dylan spun toward the guests, treating them like a jury he needed to convince. Every day I come home and there he is sitting in my living room reading my books, watching my television. My living room, my books, my television. Each possessive pronoun was like a physical blow. Tom Brown set down his beer bottle with deliberate care, the small sound echoing in Theaton's silence. Maybe we should leave. Don't leave because of him. Dylan's voice cracked with desperation now, as if he sensed his performance wasn't convincing his audience. This is our dinner party, our house, our life. But Mary wasn't buying it. Her eyes moved from Dylan to me, taking in my careful posture, my familiarity with the space, the way I naturally knew where everything belonged. Jasper, she said quietly, whose house is this? The question hung in the air like a sword. Dylan's face flushed red. We all live here together. It's complicated. No, Mary said, her voice gaining strength. It's not complicated. Whose name is on the deed? That doesn't matter. Dylan stammered, his confident facade cracking. John stood slowly, his height giving him authority in the suddenly charged room. Dylan, you called your father a freeloader in what appears to be his own home at Christmas dinner. You don't understand. Dylan's voice rose to near shouting. He acts like some generous patriarch, but he controls everything. Every penny, every decision, every moment of our lives. Controls everything. While he and Stella spent my money on designer clothes and elaborate dinner parties. Anne's voice cut through Dylan's mounting hysteria. How long have you been living here? We're not. Dylan looked wildly between his guests, realizing his carefully constructed narrative was collapsing. 8 months, but it was supposed to be temporary. 8 months, Tom repeated slowly. Rent-free? Stella finally spoke from the doorway, her voice barely above a whisper. We're getting back on our feet. On whose feet? Mary's question was surgical in its precision. Who pays the mortgage? The utilities, the food for this dinner? The questions came like arrows, each one finding its mark. Dylan's face cycled through emotions, anger, embarrassment, desperation, rage. He looked around, edible at faces that had started the evening friendly, and were now filled with dawning understanding. You all don't understand, he exploded. It's not that simple. Life is complicated. What's complicated, John said quietly, is disrespecting your father in his own home in front of guests he didn't invite. Dylan's performance was unraveling thread by thread. The authority he tried to project through volume and aggression was being demolished by simple questions and quiet observations. He's controlling. He makes us feel like children. You're acting like children, Anne said, her grandmother's voice carrying the weight of decades watching family dynamics. Grown adults should pay their own way. The words hit Dylan like physical blows, his face contorted with fury. The mask of successful host completely abandoned now. Don't you lecture me. You don't know what it's like. I know what respect looks like, Mary said firmly, and this isn't it. Dylan whirled toward me, his finger pointed like a weapon. Look at him, just standing there acting like the victim. I remained still, letting his words hang in the air, letting the guests see exactly who was creating this scene, who was destroying Christmas dinner with accusations and rage. The contrast was stark. Dylan's mounting hysteria against my controlled silence, his desperate justifications against my dignified stillness. The dining room had become a courtroom, and the jury was reaching its verdict. The dining room held its breath. Dylan stood triumphant beside my chair, chest heaving from his emotional performance, while 8 pairs of eyes waited for my response to his accusations. He'd painted me as the villain, the controlling patriarch, the burden in his narrative. I turned away from him completely. Freeloader, I spoke directly to the guests, my voice carrying the measured precision of 4 decades in engineering. Dylan, remind our guest who pays for this house. That's not important. His voice cracked slightly, the first hint that his confidence was manufactured. Who bought the food for tonight's dinner? I continued, still addressing Mary, John, Anne, and Tom as if Dylan weren't worth acknowledging. Who pays the electricity keeping these lights on? The gas heating this room, the water in those wine glasses. John shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mary's eyes moved from Dylan to me, pieces of a puzzle beginning to align. You're embarrassing yourself. Dylan's interruption sounded desperate now, less commanding. I gestured toward his feet. Those $300 sneakers you're wearing, are those my fault too? Dylan's face flushed red. Stop it. The designer jeans, the expensive watch. My voice remained level, factual. 8 months of groceries, utilities, insurance premiums. Should I get the receipts? You don't understand. Dylan spun toward the guests, seeking allies who were no longer listening to him. He controls everything. Mary set down her wine glass with deliberate care. Dylan, whose name is on the deed to this house? The question landed like a physical blow. Dylan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. This is his house, Anne said quietly, the realization dawning in her voice. Isn't it? Tom looked around the dining room with new understanding. The family photos on the walls, all showing Jasper and Margaret through decades of marriage, the careful organization, the settled comfort of long habitation. Everything pointed to one truth. How long have you been living here? John's question was surgical in its simplicity. Months, I answered when Dylan remained silent. Rentrée. They were supposed to stay a couple weeks until they got back on their feet. Stella made a small sound from the kitchen doorway somewhere, between a gasp and a groan. A couple weeks, Mary repeated slowly. 8 months ago. The math was simple enough. The guests exchanged glances, silent communications between married couples who'd spent decades reading each other's expressions. Dylan. Anne's voice carried the weight of maternal disappointment. You called your father a freeloader in his own home. You don't understand the situation. Dylan's voice rose again, but it sounded hollow now, echoing in a room that had turned against him. I understand perfectly, Tom said quietly. He looked at me with something approaching awe. You've been supporting them for 8 months. The silence that followed was different from before. Not shocked confusion, but dawning comprehension. The guests saw Dylan's expensive clothes with new eyes, understood the elaborate dinner preparations in a new context, recognized the careful way I moved through my own space. Those credit card bills you left on the kitchen counter, I continued, still speaking to the guests rather than to my son. 12,000 in debt while living in my house, eating my food, using my utilities. Dylan's face had gone pale now. The color-draining ashes carefully constructed narrative collapsed sentence by sentence. He makes us feel like children. Dylan tried one last desperate justification. You're acting like children, Mary said firmly. Grown adults should pay their own way. The words hit Dylan like a physical blow. He staggered slightly, looking around the table at faces that had started the evening friendly and were now filled with disgust. John stood slowly, his height giving him authority in the suddenly changed room. I think we've heard enough. The dining room that had begun the evening as a stage for Dylan's performance of successful hosting had become a courtroom, and thievery had reached its verdict. Dylan looked wildly between his guests, seeking support that was no longer there, understanding that his humiliation was now complete and public. This isn't over, he whispered, but the words carried no weight in a room that had already dismissed him. Dylan's whispered threat hung in the air for exactly 3 heartbeats before he exploded. His chair scraped violently against the hardwood as he shot to his feet, the sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. His fist slammed into the oak table, making dishes jump and wine glasses tremble. Enough. The word erupted from him with such force that Anne flinched backward. Mary's hand flew to her chest. Tom half rose from his seat, protective instincts engaging. Go to your room right now. The command was meant to humiliate me in front of the guests, to reassert dominance through volume and aggression. Dylan pointed toward the staircase like a parent disciplining a disobedient child. I remained perfectly still. The contrast was stark in the candle-lit dining room. Dylan's face red with rage, gesturing wildly while I stood calm and unmoved beside the chair he'd blocked me from. The guests sat frozen, witnessing something that went beyond family disagreement into the realm of public breakdown. John cleared his throat. Dylan, maybe you should know. Dylan whirled toward him, eyes wild. You don't understand. I'm the one in charge here, this is my house. But the words sounded hollow now, desperate. Everyone in the room knew the truth. Dylan. Mary's voice was soft, concerned. Please sit down. I won't sit down in my own dining room. He began pacing behind the chairs like a caged animal, hands clenched into fists. He sits there acting innocent, but he controls every penny, every decision, every moment of our lives. Stella moved slightly in the kitchen doorway, torn between loyalty and horror at her husband's public meltdown. He needs to learn respect. Dylan's voice cracked on the last word. Go upstairs now. The silence that followed was profound. 8 people holding their breath, waiting to see how this moment would resolve. I waited until the echo of his shouting faded completely before I spoke. You have until morning to move out. My voice was quiet, measured, final. No anger, no emotion, just simple statement of fact. The words hit Dylan like a physical blow. His mouth fell open. The pacing stopped. What? The question came out strangled. We're not going anywhere. You have until morning. You can't make us leave. I turned to face him directly for the first time since his outburst began. This is my house. The simplicity of the statement was devastating. No arguments, no justifications, no negotiations, just truth. Dylan's face cycled through emotions. Shock, rage, disbelief, panic. You can't. We don't have anywhere. It's Christmas. You should have thought of that before you called me a freeloader at my own dinner table. The guest sat transfixed, watching the complete destruction of Dylan's world in real time. Tom reached for his wife's hand under the table. Mary covered her mouth with her fingers and looked like she might cry. Please. Dylan's voice broke completely. Dad, please. We can talk about this. But I was already moving toward the staircase. My decision made and communicated. The dining room that had been a battlefield minutes earlier now felt like a courtroom after sentencing. Until morning, I repeated it without looking back. Behind me, the silence stretched like a held breath, broken only by the soft sound of my footsteps on the stairs, and someone, maybe Stella, beginning to cry. The Christmas dinner that Dylan had orchestrated to prove his authority had become his complete undoing, and it wasn't even 8 hours yet. The staircase creaked under my weight as I climbed away from the wreckage of Christmas dinner. Each step took me further from Dylan's breakdown and closer to the sanctuary of my bedroom. Behind me, the dining room had erupted into hushed, frantic conversation, voices overlapping as guests tried to process what they'd witnessed. My bedroom door closed with a soft click, sealing me away from the chaos below. I stood for a moment with my back against the door, listening to the muffled sounds filtering up through the floor. Dylan's voice high and panicked, Stella crying, the scrape of chairs as people moved. I removed my dinner jacket, hanging it carefully in the closet beside suits I'd worn to Margaret's funeral, to Dylan's graduation, to retirement parties and birthday celebrations. The ritual of putting away formal clothes felt symbolic somehow, shedding the costume of a performance I'd never auditioned for. The chair by the window welcomed me like an old friend. From here, I could see the driveway, the street, the normal Christmas lights twinkling in neighbors' windows. The world outside continued its holiday celebration, oblivious to the family drama that had just imploded in my dining room. Car doors slammed in the driveway. Engines started. One by one, the guests were fleeing the disaster Dylan had created. I watched headlights sweep across the snow as Tom's car backed out, followed by John and Mary's sedan. Anne's porch light flickered on across the street as she hurried home, probably eager to distance herself from the evening's ugliness. The house grew quieter as the exodus continued. Downstairs, voices rose and fell, Dylan and Stella having what sounded like an argument. Something crashed, maybe a plate being slammed down too hard. Then Stella's voice again, pleading, reasoning, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. 35 years I'd waited for him to act like an adult. 35 years of watching him take shortcuts, make excuses, expect others to clean up his messes. Margaret had always believed he'd eventually mature, find his way. Give him time, she'd said. He'll figure it out. But time had run out. 8 months of supporting him financially while he treated me like an intruder in my own home. 8 months of watching him spend money he didn't have while I clipped coupons to make ends meet. 8 months of being treated like the help in my own house. The snow continued falling outside, steady and silent. The Johnsons' inflatable Santa still waved mechanically from their front yard, oblivious to human drama. Christmas would continue tomorrow, regardless of family feuds or eviction ultimatums. Around 9 the house finally fell silent. No more arguing, no more crying, no more sounds of frantic activity. Either Dylan and Stella had exhausted themselves, or they'd retreated to the guest room to plan their next move. I settled deeper into my chair, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The familiar comfort of my own space, my own thoughts, my own decisions without interference or judgment. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Dylan would test the ultimatum, probably believing I didn't have the resolve to follow through. He'd learned tonight that his public humiliation tactics had backfired spectacularly, but desperation might drive him to try other approaches. Let him try. I'd spent 40 years solving engineering problems, analyzing systems, finding solutions. Dylan had become a problem with a clear solution. Removal. The bedroom clock ticked past 10. Outside, the neighborhood had settled into Christmas night quiet. Porch lights dimmed, windows glowing softly with tree lights and family warmth. Normal families finishing normal celebrations. I'd have a normal Christmas again starting tomorrow. The house creaked softly around me, settling into winter. Silence. Whatever sounds came from downstairs now were too faint to reach my sanctuary. For the first time in 8 months, I felt like I was home. The first thing I noticed when I woke was the silence. No running water from their bathroom, no footsteps overhead, no sounds of movement that had become the soundtrack of 8 months of unwanted cohabitation. 10 hour on the digital clock beside my bed. The deadline had passed 2 hours ago. I showered and dressed with deliberate care, choosing clothes that conveyed authority, pressed slacks, collared shirt, the leather belt Margaret had given me for our 20th anniversary. Every action felt ceremonial, preparing for a conclusion that had been inevitable since Dylan's first month of making excuses instead of progress. The staircase creaked under my weight as I descended into the aftermath of last night's disaster. Sunlight streamed through windows I hadn't bothered to close the curtains on, illuminating the wreckage of what was supposed to be Christmas dinner. Wine glasses sat abandoned on every surface, some still containing drags of expensive wine purchased with my pension money. Plates with congealed gravy and cold turkey dotted the dining room table like evidence in a crime scene. The good china, Margaret's china, looked violated somehow, stained with the residue of family warfare. Dylan's leather jacket hung over the back of my reading chair, the price tag of $200 etched in my memory from the day I'd watched him buy it. Stella's cosmetics were scattered across the bathroom counter upstairs, her expensive face creams and serums claiming territory like a small invasion. I made coffee in a kitchen that still smelled of last night's turkey, listening for any sounds from the guest bedroom. Nothing. They were sleeping in, confident in their assumption that the old man had been bluffing. 35 years of watching me bend, compromise, and accommodate had taught them I was all bark and no bite. The morning felt different than yesterday's tense anticipation. No anxiety, no second guessing. The decision had crystallized during the night into something clean and final. They'd had their chance to leave with dignity. They'd chosen defiance instead. I settled at the kitchen table with my coffee, positioning myself with a clear view of the hallway leading to their bedroom. The house felt larger somehow, as if removing the weight of their presence had opened up space I'd forgotten existed. Through the window, I could see the Johnsons across the street, hanging Christmas lights they'd apparently forgotten to put up before the holiday. Normal people having normal problems, not hosting adult children who called them freeloaders in their own homes. The coffee was good, the expensive blend Dylan had insisted on buying. Another small irony in a situation full of them. I'd drink the rest of it after they were gone. A small victory toast with ingredients purchased using my generosity and thrown back in my face. Clock hands moved with mechanical precision toward 11. Still no sounds from upstairs. Still no acknowledgement that they'd missed the deadline. Still no signs of packing or preparation. Their silence was its own form of communication. A bet that I lacked the resolve to follow through on my ultimatum. They were about to learn how expensive that bet would prove Toby. At exactly 11, floorboards creaked overhead. The sound of feet hitting the floor, muffled conversation, the toilet flushing, finally awake, and probably discussing strategy for managing the aftermath of last night's explosion. I remained seated with my coffee, waiting, patient as I'd been for 8 months, but with an entirely different purpose now. Dylan appeared at the bottom of the stairs, wearing the silk pajamas Stella had given him for his birthday. $70 pajamas. I remembered the receipt. His hair was disheveled, but his posture carried the casual confidence of someone who believed the storm had passed. "Morning, Dad," he padded into the kitchen, bare feet slapping against tiles I'd installed myself 15 years ago. "Coffee smells good." I watched him pour a cup using the mug Margaret had painted in her ceramics class, the one with "World's Best Husband" in her careful script. Another small violation in a series of violations.
"Sleep well?"
I asked eventually. He leaned against the counter, affecting the pose of someone who belonged there. "Last night got pretty heated. You know how holidays can be. Everyone's stressed, emotions running high." The dismissal was practiced, polished, reduced the previous evening's public humiliation to holiday stress, family tensions. Nothing more serious than a disagreement over football teams or dinner timing. "Pretty heated," I repeated. "Exactly, but it's Christmas morning." "Well, the day after Christmas." He gestured with his mug toward the living room where wrapping paper from gifts they'd bought with my money still littered the floor. Time to move past it. You know, family's family. Family's family. The phrase that had covered 8 months of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. "So everything's fine now?" I asked. "Of course it's fine." Dylan settled into the chair across from me, comfortable in his assumption that yesterday's consequences had evaporated with dawn's light. "We had a fight. Happens to everyone. Everything's fine now." I took a sip of coffee, studying his face over the rim. Confident, relaxed, already planning how to smooth over the damage with his friends who'd witnessed his meltdown. The art of making problems disappear through charm and selective memory. "Fine will be when you've moved out." The words dropped into the kitchen like stones into still water. Dylan's confident expression flickered just for a moment before reassembling itself. "Dad, come on. You can't be serious about that deadline nonsense." "I'm completely serious." He laughed, the sound forced and hollow. "It's been, 14 hours? You expect us to pack up our entire lives and find a new place overnight? I expected you to start packing last night. Where exactly are we supposed to go? It's the day after Christmas. Nothing's open. Nowhere to look for apartments." His tone shifted toward the reasonable, the practical. "Be realistic here." I stood carrying my empty mug to the sink and turned to face him. "You had 8 months to make other arrangements." "We've been trying. We've been looking." The lie came smoothly, practiced. "The job market is tight. Rental prices are insane. We need more time." "You've had time." Dylan's facade began to crack around the edges. "So what are you going to do if we don't leave? What's your big plan?" I reached for the phone hanging on the kitchen wall, the same spot where it had hung for 20 years. Dylan's eyes followed the movement, his confident posture shifting slightly. "You'll see. Dad, this is ridiculous. You can't make us leave. His voice rose, the reasonable mask slipping, to reveal the panic underneath. We're family. My hand closed around the phone receiver. Dylan stared at me, finally beginning to understand that his practiced manipulations weren't working, that the old patterns of guilt and obligation had been permanently broken. Stop, he said quietly. Just stop and think about this. But I'd been thinking about it for 8 months. I'd been thinking about it all night. The time for thinking was over. The police arrived in exactly 23 minutes. Faster response time than I'd expected for a civil matter. 2 officers, one younger with close-cropped hair, one older with the patient demeanor of someone who'd handled domestic disputes for decades. Sir, we received a call about a property dispute. The older officer stood on my front porch, notepad ready, professional but not unfriendly. Yes, officer. I need assistance removing unauthorized occupants from my home. I held out the folder I'd prepared. Deed mortgage statements, utility bills, all in my name. These individuals have been living here without lease or rental agreement, and have refused to leave when asked. Dylan appeared behind me in the hallway, still in those expensive pajamas, his face pale with disbelief. Officer, this is crazy. This is my father. We had a family argument. The younger officer examined my documentation while his partner listened to Dylan's protests. Property ownership wasn't complicated. Either your name weighs in the papers or it wasn't. Sir, are you the sole owner of this property? The older officer asked me. Yes, my late wife and I purchased it in 1987. It's been fully paid off for 12 years, and these individuals have been residing here without your permission, initially with permission as temporary guests. That arrangement ended last night. I asked them to leave by this morning. They refused. The officers exchanged glances. The kind of professional communication that comes from years of dealing with family drama that crosses legal lines. Sir, the older officer addressed Dylan. You need to gather your belongings and leave the premises. This is insane. He can't just kick us out. We've been living here for 8 months. The property owner has the right to remove unauthorized occupants. You have no lease agreement or rental contract establishing tenancy rights. Stella appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a bathrobe that cost more than my monthly electric bill. Her face was swollen from crying, makeup smeared from last night's disaster. How long do we have? She asked quietly. I'd recommend gathering essential items now. The older officer replied. You can arrange for remaining belongings later if necessary. The next hour played out with mechanical efficiency. Dylan alternated between furious protests and desperate bargaining, but legal authority wasn't something he could charm or manipulate. The officers supervised as boxes and suitcases emerged from the guest bedroom. Estella gathered cosmetics from the bathroom as 8 months of gradual invasion was reversed in 60 minutes. Neighbors emerged onto porches and peered through windows, suburban curiosity drawn by official vehicles and public drama. Mrs. Henderson, from 3 houses down, walked her dog past my driveway twice, clearly gathering intelligence for the neighborhood network. This isn't over, Dylan hissed as he loaded the last box into their car. You think you've won something here, but this isn't over. The threat hung in the winter air like visible breath, but it carried no weight behind police presence and legal documentation. Have a safe trip, son. Their car backed out of my driveway for the last time, Dylan gunning the engine in a final gesture of impotent rage. The officers completed their paperwork, advised me about restraining orders if harassment continued, and departed with professional courtesy that treated me as what I was, a property owner exercising legitimate rights. The house settled into silence as their car disappeared around the corner. I stood in my living room surrounded by the debris of Christmas dinner, but free of the weight that had pressed down on my life for 8 months. On the coffee table, Dylan's expensive watch sat forgotten, probably worth more than most people's weekly salary. I picked it up, feeling its weight, then walked to the front door and set it on the porch. Let him come back for it if he wanted it badly enough. The afternoon sun streamed through windows that were mine again, into rooms that belonged to me again, across floors where I could walk without justifying my presence. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. Tomorrow I'd start cleaning up the damage. Tonight I'd simply enjoy being home. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.